Victoria, are you familiar with Phil Steele?
No.
Phil Steele, the college football yearbook guy. It's a comprehensive. I need my readers to read it because the print is so small.
Yeah.
So much information, a lot of initials and all that. If you want to know everything about every team,
nice.
Right, that's fine. But if you want to get really in-depth on ACC teams, everything, and you don't need to know initials, and you don't necessarily need your readers, David Hale. On Twitter, at a David Hale joint, ACC college football writer for ESPN. Thankfully you put everything on your website, David, it's davidmhale.com, so you can get all of the rankings, all of the reasonings for every position group in the ACC. I had 2 days off and I couldn't finish it, David.
I try to be like the Tolstoy of ACC reporters. I actually don't know if he wrote War and Peace. Is that accurate?
Yes, that would definitely be it. No, it is.
Right, then I am very aware of literature. I'm very well educated, and yes, I want it to be the War and Peace of ACC off-season content every year.
It is incredible. So a full position ranking for every position. Well, I mean, not every, like offensive line is its own thing, defensive line is its own thing, all of that, and the receiving groups. It is awesome. It is very comprehensive. I now feel like I am ready for the Atlantic Coast Conference, and I realize there's a lot of gray area because there's so many new faces. So I am encouraged by your thoughts on NC State. I am the only question I think we all have is, can their offensive line be in the top, let's say top third of the league? So let me just start there because we know they have skill position players pretty much in good spots.
Yeah, this was I actually just left NC State and talking to Dave Doeren. He's enthusiastic about it. It's an older group. They've got I think 4 graduate players that are starting this year. Zeke Correll coming in from Notre Dame, who's got 30-plus starts under his belt. I mean, it's an experienced group. One of the things, you mentioned this position group rankings, one of the things that I found so interesting, like one of the more interesting stats that I dug up, is if you look back to, I think it was 2018, every year NC State has been 90th or worse in run blocking and yards before contact per rush, or whatever stat you want to use for that. This has included 5 different NFL draft picks on their O-line, including a couple of first-rounders, 3 different O-line coaches, and yet the results have so consistently been bad at run blocking. And to me, that's where, they pass blocked well, and I think they will continue to do so. To me, it is having that physicality up front to dictate the line of scrimmage on offense when you have to play a physical, dominant football game on the ground. And I think, that's still a big question for me. Zeke Correll's a guy, and I don't know if it's just the veteran guy coming from Notre Dame who really is a big locker room guy thing, but Florida State had a guy by the name of Dylan Gibbons a few years ago who came over with Mike Norvell's first class at Florida State and really helped change the entire culture of the FSU O-line. And that, if you recall back to when Norvell got to FSU, that O-line was an absolute train wreck, shambles, terrible, terrible unit. And he was not the single best player. He ever had a real shot at the NFL, but he was a good player who did things right and changed the culture of the FSU O-line room. And I can see a lot of similarity with Zeke Correll and maybe doing the same thing at NC State. So, look, it's a veteran group. I think it's a talented group. To me, so much of it is going to be about the edge in the run game, and that's where I think Zeke Correll makes a huge difference and maybe sort of pushes that team into the next level, because I agree with you. The pieces are there at all the skill positions. I think the attitude, certainly from Grayson McCall, is there to make this into a big winner, but when you are third and short and you need it,
yep,
do they have an offensive line that can go get it? And I think that, to me, is the biggest looming question right now.
Yeah, they have been super reliant. Like last year, their running game, it eventually morphed into Brennan Armstrong running around and Casey Concepcion. That became their running game.
Running back there, and that's a problem.
Right.
Right. Look, they went out and got Jordan Waters, who is a good, tough, hard-nosed runner. Hollywood Smothers comes in. I think he is a flashy guy who can get you some big plays. They've got some depth at tailback, but it is about the want to as much as it is anything else.
Yeah, last thing about the Wolfpack, at least offensively, is it fair to say that if their offensive line turns out to stay relatively healthy, because that's a big part of it, and I think that's been a big deal for them over the last few years, is that they have not been able to recover from injury there. They have been a little bit thin beyond the starters. If their offensive line is good and stays relatively healthy, that this is a legitimate contender to maybe win the league.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very reasonable thing to say. Now, look, I'm fascinated a little bit to see how Robert Anae uses all of these pieces, because he can sometimes be a mad scientist in both a good and a bad way.
Right.
If you look at his track record, is he a guy who is going to, pull all the right levers? Like, the downside to having so many tools and so many toys to play with is that you don't always necessarily know the right one to use in the right moment. So, he has to understand the tools that are in his toolbox and when to use which one. So, to me, I think there's a little bit of that going on. It's like you've got to carve out your identity early and decide who you're going to be, and decide, when the chips are down and you need a play, who are the guys you rely on, and not get cute. That has been Robert Anae's downfall in the past. But you're right. I mean, look, the tools are there, and I will say, I think Grayson McCall is just such a fantastic add. And I have questions still about, who is he as a Power 5 QB? Who is he outside of Jamie Chadwell's offense? Those are not unfounded. But I think he's a guy with a good arm. He's a guy who makes good decisions. And he is a guy who has this sort of confidence and swagger to him that I think has been missing from NC State, particularly on the offensive side of the ball under Dave Doeren. Often been a program, and again, particularly on that side of the ball, that is sort of always waiting for the other shoe to drop. And you're right in mentioning the injuries, and they have been banged up at quarterback and on the O-line and at other positions problematically as the years have progressed. And I think everybody sort of has this expectation of, what's the bad thing that's going to happen to us? Grayson McCall ain't that guy. Grayson McCall is a guy who expects good things to happen,
right,
and will go out there and fight like hell for it. I think NC State, at that position in particular, really needs that.
David Hale from ESPN is joining us here on the Adam Gold Show. A David Hale joint on Twitter. Normally I would just talk about North Carolina's offense. I think if Max Johnson is good, I think their offense, especially because of Amari and Hampton and a good receiving core, I think they have a chance if their offensive line is good. But I want to get to the defense, which hasn't been good at all since Mac Brown has come back. And frankly, it wasn't good during the Larry Fedora era either. So it's been a while. It's been a minute since we've seen North Carolina play good representative defense. Did they look any better to you when you look at their position groups?
It's hard for me to answer that question, because the look of UNC has not been the problem the last few years. They've recruited guys who get off the bus looking good. They just haven't played well. They have not lived up to what that recruiting pedigree should be. So I not to single out one guy, because there's a lot that fits into this, but Travis Shaw is such a perfect example of a guy who was a great recruit, looks the part getting off the bus, and hasn't lived up to any of the hype. But you talk to folks, Jeff Collins and others around UNC in spring and into the summer, he's looked a lot better. He's playing better. He looks more, he seems like he's going to become that guy or could become that guy. But, you wake up every day and see the sun come up, you start to expect it. And there's a little bit of an expectation that this is, UNC is not a defense that plays salty. They don't play physical. They don't give it their all. They are too happy to rest on laurels. And that's, again, across numerous coaching staffs and coordinators at this point. So to me, the look of UNC has not been the problem. It's, are those guys willing to do what it takes to win at the highest level? And too often they have not been in recent years. So look, I think you can look at the unit this year and say, K'Mon Rucker, I know what we're getting in him. Power Eccles, I know what I'm getting in him. But how many other guys are going to go do it?
Right.
How many guys are going to live up to it? And that's Marcus Allen, it's Elijah Huzzy, it's Travis Shaw, it's the new faces in the linebacking core this year. There's a lot of guys who need to do it, who need to prove something. And again, proving something is not about being really good in the weight room. It's about how much are you going to fight like hell for it on the actual field, because that's really been what they have been missing there.
David Hale is joining us here on the Adam Gold Show. All right, now here's where it's going to take, like, you didn't do a coaching tier ranking, a coaching group.
I need these guys to still answer my calls, so I had to be very careful about how I go about that.
All right, because if we were doing that, I'm not sure how well Miami would rank out. But, man, when you look at their roster, quarterback, top tier, running back, second tier, wide receiver, tight ends, top tier, offensive line, top tier. I'm using the David Hale on online, davidmhale.com. Offensive line, top tier, defensive line, top tier, linebacker, top tier. This team looks loaded. Can they overcome Mario Cristobal?
Yeah, I have said this a few times this offseason, that if you took Miami's roster and put them in Clemson jerseys or Florida State jerseys and said that's Florida State's team or that's Clemson's team, I think you would be picking them to win the league without second thought, because they, on paper, look the part up and down at every position. I think they're deep at almost every position other than maybe in the secondary. They've been recruiting. I mean, and Mario Cristobal can recruit his butt off.
Yep.
They have got a lot of really talented young guys. They've dominated in the portal. They went all in on the portal and added Cam Ward and Damian Martinez and tons of other talent. All of the pieces are there. But, I mean, we've watched Mario Cristobal teams going back to Oregon, and he finds a way to lose games. And frankly, as much as I think Cam Ward is perhaps deservedly the number one ranked quarterback in the ACC this year, I mean, he's the guy who has made mistakes at inopportune times as well. And Miami, as a program, has shot itself in the foot way more times over the last 20 years than they have surprised us. So add all of those things up, and your discomfort with picking them and my discomfort with picking them and everybody else's discomfort with picking them is justified. But boy, oh boy, on paper, they absolutely look the part up and down that roster. So, I went through sort of the schedule and kind of just quickly off the top of my head and tried to pick every game and see where we came out. And when you look at Miami's schedule, I don't see a game that I feel like they can't win.
Right.
But I also see 4 or 5 that, past Miami teams would find a way to trip over their own shoelaces. So,
I mean, they might not take a knee.
Yeah. I mean, look, you touch the stove enough times, you learn not to do it anymore. I don't want to get burned again, so I'm kind of inclined not to pick them. But the stove's looking awful appetizing right now.
Yeah, it seems like their most difficult games, including the game against Florida State, they get on their home field. We'll see. Florida's not supposed to be vintage Florida, and I think Miami right now, even though the game is in Gainesville, I think the Hurricanes are a small favorite in that game up there, and that's you and I can have all sorts of offshoot conversations about which games the ACC needs, not to mention the individual schools. I mean, that's one the league has to have, no?
Yeah, it absolutely does, because it's, again, Tennessee and NC State's probably in this conversation too, because unlike some previous years where they're going up against the SEC, they're not out-talented in these games. And that Miami-Florida one's so interesting because I talked to too many Miami fans who are nervous as hell about them doing something dumb, and then I talk to Florida fans, and they think they're about to get boat raced in that game. Like, both of these are very, very damaged, emotionally fragile fan bases right now. But yeah, look, I've been a part of way too many of these conversations about ACC narratives and what they have to do to sort of change the conversation. And frankly, I think to a certain extent, there's nothing that they can do to truly change the conversation, at least in the short term. But what they can do to at least force a re-evaluation of people's preconceived notions is win these damn football games. Like, if Clemson beats Georgia, it forces a conversation that SEC folks don't want to have. And, you know, Miami, I don't know that Miami beating Florida necessarily changes the narrative, but I know them losing to Florida only reinforces the narrative. And I think that's the same thing with NC State and Tennessee. And we'll get into, you know, there's some other game. I know, does Boston College really have a chance against Missouri, or does Wake really have a chance against Ole Miss? You know, those are longer odds. These are ones where the ACC should be in these games and cannot. I mean, the teams want to win for their own reasons, but I think for the league, it is so essential that they don't go out and embarrass themselves.
Yeah, I think North Carolina, Minnesota falls into a little bit of a different category. Is that probably two, as I like to call them, mid-table clubs in their respective conferences, and it would be really good for UNC to win that. Final thing for David Hale, and I appreciate his time, at a David Hale joint on Twitter. If you go to davidmhale.com, you can see a link to every ranking and every explanation as to how he arrived at every position rankings for all the. You'll spend the entire day, but I think it'll be easier on the eyes than opening up a Phil Steele. Florida State and Clemson are all over the top tier defensively. I think there's probably more knowns about Florida State. We know that DJ Uiagalelei is not great, but if they can run the ball, their offense will be fine. They're going to be defense related. Your thoughts on Clemson's offense and their potential to be better than they have been?
Yeah, you bring up a good sort of starting point on this, which is that I think Florida State, their window is that they will not be they will be maybe at worst about average offensively and at best pretty good offensively. I don't think that they are going to be an elite offense, and I'm pretty sure they're not going to be bad. So, like, the window or the margin is smaller with them. With Clemson, because of the unknowns, there is a lot wider of a range. Now, look, we've watched 3 straight years of Clemson offense being, frankly, pretty bad.
Yeah.
Particularly at the quarterback play. But I look at Cade Klubnik, too, and I say, like, dude's talented, and he sort of gets dinged as being bad last year. He wasn't really bad. He was really good in, like, 5 or 6 games and terrible in 5 or 6 games and middle of the road in almost none of them. Like, so how do you take Cade Klubnik and turn him into the guy who is very good more often? And even some of the games in which he was largely pretty good in, like the Miami game in Florida State in particular, he makes just a terrible decision at the worst possible time that costs them football games. So how do you remedy that? I think you can say, like, he's a smart kid with a lot of talent and a year of experience under his belt. He learns lessons and gets better. They have not developed wide receivers, but they have probably the 2 best freshmen that they've had in 5 years on campus right now. And Brian Wesco in particular went through the spring and has earned absolute raves. Like, are those guys going to be T. Higgins and Amari Rodgers, or are they going to be, Frank Ladson and Joe Ngata, who really didn't ever develop into anything? So, like, there's a wide margin there. The offensive line has been pretty meh for a long time at Clemson, but they bring in Matt Luke. They're an older group. They should be much improved. Like, are they better, or are they going to be, struggle? Like, last year there was too many times where the offensive line looked like they were playing a different scheme than the offensive skill guys were playing. Like, are they on the same page this year? To me, Clemson just has so many big offensive questions, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, because if they're answered in the affirmative, I think this can get back to vintage Clemson offense. But there's also a very good chance that they're every bit as bad as they were last year. The receivers don't develop. There's injuries. Cade Klubnik sticks his foot in his mouth at the worst time, and we get the same Clemson that we saw last year.
That is everybody's fear. Look, I think the ACC has a lot of the ingredients to have a great season including some second-tier contenders who might even make their way to Charlotte, SMU, Virginia Tech, NC State, although I hesitate to say second tier because I think they can be top tier. But there's a lot of teams that could have, 9 or 10 win seasons around the league that will make everybody look a lot better. David Hale.
It is the deepest the top of this league has ever been, in my opinion.
Wow.
So, yeah, I'm with you on this.
Well, go to davidmhale.com and get the entirety of the position rankings and all the explanations and pack a lunch. It is comprehensive. I thank you very much, sir. I'll talk to you soon.
Yep, great talking to you guys.
You got it. David Hale